As you know, office space is a little effed up right now. Only half of New Yorkers are going to the office, and you're seeing more and more distress as loans come due on office properties, not to mention mini banking fallout. And you have big names like Brookfield, RXR, and related have handed back keys and defaulted on buildings. None of these guys on stage have done that. So it's this big existential question for cities now. What do you do with all these office buildings and office districts? How much vacancy can landlords withstand? Do you just demolish buildings? That's an extreme measure some people have proposed. And we're also going to look today at some of the ways you might be able to adapt and reuse some of this space for residential conversion. We have one of the key players in conversions up here today. So, it doesn't seem like there's a silver bullet, but we're kind of grappling towards an answer, and we're going to grapple today together. So I want to introduce these guys who are on stage with me. We've got Nathan Berman, right here, closest to me. And Nathan's been called the king of the office conversion. His company Metro Loft has converted more than 3.5 million square feet of office space in Lower Manhattan into thousands of units starting back in the 90s when there was a period that's really starting to be comparable to today. He's got 1.5 million square feet in the pipeline. And he's got a partnership with our next panelist, who is Marty Berger, in the center there. And they're raising $1.5 billion to start Silverloft, which is going to tackle conversions, beginning with 55 Broad Street in Lower Manhattan. And of course, Marty's company knows a thing or two about offices. You may have heard of the redevelopment of the World Trade Center site following 9/11. And overall, Silverstein generally has a portfolio of 40 million square feet, residential, commercial. So huge players in the market. Looks like they're going to be big players in the conversion space as well. So thanks, Marty. And finally, we have Jody Durst, president of Durst Organization. Don't need to tell you who those guys are. One of the true dynasties. One Bryant Park, 4 Times Square, One World Trade. But they've also got properties on 3rd Avenue, office buildings in the 40s and 50s. What do you do with those? What does the occupancy look like? What do you do with some of the office stock that's out there right now? And Durst has been very creative in that. You guys put a bee farm on the top of One Bryant Park. It's being creative about office right now is huge. So I want to jump into it with these guys. And I want to start off with a simple but kind of surprisingly divisive question. And I wanted to direct it to Jody. Are we all going back to the office full time at some point? Do you still think that, or no, or what?
I think three days a week we're seeing occupancies basically at the same level as before COVID. Mondays is certainly less, and Fridays is just about non-existent. And I think the answer to your question is little by slowly we're going to trickle back to the office over time, but it's a long road, I suspect.
And do you guys think that? I mean, the reasons that have been touted for back to the office is a recession's going to hit, and people who don't come to the office are going to be fired, and the big banks are going to have people come back, or the federal government's going to tell people to come back. Do you think that will happen? It hasn't happened yet, right? How about you, Marty? What do you think?
Well, the city and state are back, but the federal government has finally, I think the president put out an edict that each agency has to come back with a plan by this summer on how they're going to come back. So they're slowly thinking about coming back, but it's really a crime that they're not all, required to be in the office. And I heard a statistic that only 30% of the government workers are actually logging in, so they're not even working from home.
Wow.
So it's really a bad situation.
I mean, you can't imagine the lost productivity there, probably. And I know, Nathan, I know you hope they never come back to the office.
Well, look, I think that I'm sort of looking at the younger sort of Generation Z that probably have never seen the previous office market. And remote work is such a big portion of their life now that I don't know how this generation ever reconsiders, office.
Yeah. It's not part of their life, right?
Exactly.
But our numbers are very similar to Jody's, and I think there's starting to be a paradigm shift between employer and employee. And we have a very large tenant at 4 World Trade Center, about 700,000 square feet. They have 3,000 employees. And they were, we have the digital turnstile so we can tell how many people from each company are in. And they were tracking at about 22% physical occupancy. And they announced a 6% layoff about 8 weeks ago globally. And all of a sudden the number shot up to 77%.
Wow.
Magic how that happened.
So, I mean, is that the new normal, and how does that filter down to like operating your buildings and profit and keeping things going? If you're at 70 to 80% occupancy, is that the new normal, and does that pencil out for your office portfolio, Marty and Jody?
I would say that people have to understand that even on the best day before COVID, you weren't talking about 100% occupancy. There are people out of the office all the time. And so when I said roughly 80% during the high point of the week, that's pretty much normal.
That's where you would have been back in 2018 or 19, somewhere around there?
Yes.
Got it.
But I think people are using their space differently today than they were, and as Jody pointed out, Tuesday through Thursday. So if you're going to have peak occupancy Tuesday through Thursday, you still need the same amount of offices. You're not
Right.
the hoteling
Right.
that hasn't really worked out for people.
Right. And so taking a step, taking a leap from that, what does that mean? And this gets a little bit more complicated because it goes into refinancing and all that stuff. But what does that say about office values now? Like, you look at overall trades, are office values down, say 30% off of what they were, 40%, 50%? What do you think? And I know, Jody, you're not looking to sell right now, and you're a well-capitalized organization, but for the guys who are in a more distressed position, where are values at right now?
It's tough to give a generic answer because you've got 2 buildings next to each other. We operate 120 Broadway and 4 World Trade Center 2 blocks apart from each other, but they're 107 years apart in age. So it's hard to, and they're both 2 million plus square feet. So B buildings probably have lost more value than A buildings. I think you can still get very high rents for any new space in most cities.
Yeah.
Maybe not San Francisco right now, but eventually. And there's definitely been a decline. I just can't tell you whether it's 10 to 30 depending on the class of the building.
Right. And this ties into, I'm going to get into conversions in a second, but are you starting to see values of office properties at the $300 a square foot level, $400 a square foot? I know at 55 Broad, you guys bought it at, what, $400 a square foot?
Under 400, but yes.
And that's the level at which you can start to do conversions, right?
Again, very generic to say that's the case, but it really depends on a lot of different variables, which Nathan and I have been experiencing.
Yeah. So I want to ask, Nathan, you've been waiting patiently. This is the big question right now. We talked to one major developer yesterday. He said probably 1 in 1,000 buildings can be converted. Nathan, you're saying I can convert any building. So where does the rub lie there? What's the disconnect? What do you think it says about the market and what you're able to do?
Before I answer that question, just wanted to say that, conversions, there's a lot of attention on conversions right now, but I wouldn't be writing any obituaries yet for the office market. Mm-hmm. It'll be back. But it takes 2 or 3 years, so I think people may be overreacting a little bit. There will be, I'm sure there will be certain obsolescent office stock that doesn't come back, mm-hmm. but it's a small fraction of inventory that just simply can't compete going forward. So this isn't going to be, I don't expect this to be an avalanche of conversions in the city. There'll be mm-hmm. dozens of conversion of large-scale buildings, but it's not going to be en masse. Mm-hmm. And in terms of physically, not talking about regulatory, but physically, any building that we know of in New York City is convertible. The question is simply cost and efficiency. We are doing a project now with the GFP downtown, 25 Water, which has a floor plate which is ordinarily would be impossible to convert. It's a 40,000-foot floor plate with two sides of legal light and air. And our approach to that 1,300-unit conversion is we are creating two courtyards in the middle of this building for legal light and air to make it work. So if 25 Water is convertible, then literally anything else is.
So you could go to Midtown and just do a large floor plate in the same way, and it really hinges on coring the center of the building so you get the windows.
There are we have a bag of tricks that we've accumulated over the years. There's literally so many different tools in that box to do practically anything and everything.
Yeah.
Remassing, courtyards, blind shafts, on and on and on.
You know, I was just going to say, a number of years ago, if you had a failed office building, people tried to convert it to life science. That was the buzzword then.
Right.
Then they realized it wasn't so easy to just convert to life science. You have exhausting issues and zoning issues and everything. So not that many buildings got converted to life science. Now it's the same thing. Everyone's, it's a failed office building. We're just going to make it residential. We'll do that conversion. I've learned a ton from Nathan and his team in the last year. And as Nathan said, any building can be converted, but you really have three variables: what you pay for the building, what it costs you to convert it, and then what rent you're going to get once you end up with whatever layout you have and amenities.
Right.
So that's why there's so many variables. It's not a generic question. And two buildings next to each other, one might be convertible and one might not. Maybe because of what you bought it for, and maybe because of the floor plate size.
Right. And to kind of turn that over to you, Jody, you have some of these office properties on 3rd Avenue. Let's say you convert them, it's a $100 million, $200 million job, and you might end up with subpar rental units. On the flip side, you might just renovate the office space and spend $20 million and just be good with 70% occupancy. Is that kind of the A and B scenario in your mind right now?
You stole my thunder, basically. We looked very carefully at 2 or 3 of our 3rd Avenue buildings. And let me just back up for a minute and say that when we build a building from the ground up, we try to make it the very best building we can, because you have one opportunity for that. And as a result of that, they remain competitive for longer. When they start to lose their competitive nature, that's when we update our buildings. So when we looked at 3rd Avenue, we realized that residential buildings are carefully designed for column locations, riser locations, distance from perimeter to core, all those issues. And when you try to convert an office building to residential, you have to be very careful that the resulting design is something that people want to live in. And when we looked at our 3rd Avenue buildings, we realized that we could spend $200 million in a conversion, or take 10% of that money and just make it more attractive for people to come back to work.
Right.
And then meet the market in terms of rent. So that's the direction we're taking.
Right. And would it have mattered if the product, you could somehow do it so it was luxury, or, is it inherent in that question, is it the fact that you are going to be doing subpar kind of rentals and not ideal layouts and all that stuff that factors into it? I'm sorry to use the cliche, but there is a flight to quality. And while our 3rd Avenue buildings are old, they were built between 1955 and 1969, they're still Class A buildings, and we feel
based on the activity that we have in leasing right now, that we're on the right course.
Go ahead, Marty.
None of the buildings that we own are we converting. We're keeping them all office. I don't know if we were lucky or smart, but prior to the pandemic, we started putting amenity floors and outdoor spaces and food, offerings, and then applying our hospitality company, which is called Inspire, to all of our buildings. And that really helped us keep the B buildings, leased through this period, and we're doing more than our fair share of leasing. And then when we met Nathan over a year ago and started working together, we created an AI model together that looked at 3,200 buildings south of 96th Street, and then put all these variables that we learned from MetroLoft, whether it was floor size or ceiling height or the zoning, and we put that into the model. There were 9 criteria, and it spit out about 280 buildings. And we said, these 280 buildings are quote unquote convertible, even though Nathan could come up with a way to convert anything.
Right.
But that's what we've been going. And we said, what if we were able to capture 5% of that? What is that? And it was something like 15,000 units,
Right,
which
right.
would be the biggest portfolio that anyone owns in New York City.
And did you run that same model against your own office buildings that Jody did and say, should we convert these? Does it pencil out? And it ended up not penciling out?
We didn't look at our own buildings because we're not going down that path. We took steps to not have to do that.
Yeah, got it. So there's something that's kind of entering the conversation as well too, which is you're starting to hear like little inklings of this about demolishing buildings. And somebody was talking to you before the panel in the green room was saying, if you'd rather have an office building or vacant land today, you'd rather have vacant land. It's worth more. So, do you think you're going to see more demolitions happening around the city eventually?
I don't think so, but there's got to be a reuse for it. Look, retail was the unfavored child for many years, and now it's starting to come back. As Nathan said, maybe 2 or 3 years. There will always be some obsolete buildings. New York City has something like 60% of their buildings older than 75 years or more. So, things become obsolete. And if a landlord can't spend the money to compete with the other B and C buildings in that class, then something's going to happen to it.
Right, right.
By the way, something on that, and knocking buildings down, what people are not taking into consideration is, and we're talking about, let's say, sizable assets, 3, 4, 500,000 feet and up. How many of those buildings are actually completely vacant and would be available to be knocked down?
Right.
There are probably less than 5 buildings that fit that category. Most of these buildings have an occupancy of 60, 70. They're failing, but they're 60 or 70% occupancy anyway.
Right.
So how do who can afford to wait those tenants out or buy them out to knock the building down?
Right. We're certainly not talking about ghost towers or anything like that in New York.
That's correct. And also, with today's zoning, a lot of these buildings are overbuilt. You can't afford to knock them down because you can't put the same FAR back up.
And one other thing on conversions is it's really a fantastic adaptive reuse from office to residential if you can make it work, because the building we're creating is going to be carbon neutral going forward. We're not adding any steel, we're not adding any concrete, we're not adding any window wall. And so it's the best adaptive use from a sustainability perspective and from an ESG perspective.
Right, right. That's a good point. So when you did the analysis on I think you said 290 buildings, how much of those were in Midtown versus Lower Manhattan? I mean, is it spread out as far as the convertible stuff you've seen?
They were scattered all over the place, but in pockets. Obviously, a lot downtown because that was the first financial district. So you have the oldest buildings downtown.
Yeah, yeah. And where are you looking? I mean, this is a nationwide project you're working on. Nathan, I know you're more focused on Lower Manhattan, but Marty, are you going around the country right now and looking at different office districts and trying to find stuff that's similar to Lower Manhattan as far as having those small floor plates and that sort of thing?
I know we're fielding, questions from people from all over the country, whether it's San Francisco, LA, DC, Philadelphia, Boston. You have to go to the markets that have older building stock.
Yeah.
We're focusing on New York first because we want to become experts with Nathan in this, and then we'll start exploring outside.
Yeah, because you're seeing some crazy office values. I mean, there's a building that was in the news the other day that we wrote about, $100 a square foot in San Francisco. I mean, this is like 1990s values, right? It's crazy. And it also seems, I mean, if you look nationally, I don't know if you've delved into this yet, but I mean, the office occupancy in New York is at around 50%. West Coast, maybe it's more like 40%. Texas is more like 60%. But it's not so crazy. It's not like there's one part of the country where everybody's going into the office every single day, every person, and in other parts, nobody's going, right? I mean, does it seem more blended to you?
We're seeing light in our building that we bought in LA. We bought the tallest office building west of the Mississippi during the pandemic, the US Bank Tower. It's a 1.4 million square foot building, and it's the tallest building on the skyline. We just spent $60 million renovating it with an amenity floor, a new lobby, and a lot of food offerings. And we're starting to get a lot of leasing done. So we just had McKinsey go from Century City to downtown to our building. We have a bunch of law firms that we're working with. We're probably fielding, 500,000 or 600,000 square feet of deals right now to try to lease the building back up. And it's been successful. But the building next to it, is a building that Brookfield owns. It's giving back. That they're giving back. It's
right.
The gas tower building, and there's a bunch of others. So we bought it at a really great basis at the time. We spent more money to bring it up to snuff with all the amenities, and we're seeing some benefits from what we put into it.
Yeah, and I want to get back to amenities in a second, and just look at like some of the tenants and what they're thinking now. But I want to stay on conversions for a second. What should, back in the 90s when you first did these projects in Lower Manhattan, you had 421G, the government was giving you all these incentives. Right now, like, it seems like Hochul tried to push through the housing agenda, not much happened. Like, do you need incentives to make these projects work, or can you do it on your own, or what's kind of your outlook for what the city and state should be doing and what you need?
Well, look, I remain somewhat skeptical about any assistance from the state or the city when it comes to real estate in general, and certainly conversions. But our focus downtown has been always the price, price per pound downtown was more compelling.
Right.
Than in Midtown. We could never make the numbers work in Midtown. But what we're seeing right now is that the values are have come down to such a point that it's now beginning to make sense to do the Midtown buildings, and without any assistance from the state,
right?
Or state.
You're going to get down to 200, 300, 400
that's correct.
square foot.
We are seeing pricing on Midtown office building probably $300 less a foot.
That's crazy.
Than it was 2.5, 3 years ago.
Wow.
So I think you will begin to see a lot of conversions in Midtown beginning to happen, because downtown has been kind of, let's call it, picked over a little bit over the past 15, 20 years. So.
Right.
It's a sad statement, but one of the things we learned working with Nathan was, if you have to talk to the city, don't do it. Work on the next project, because there's just too much brain damage. And that's just a function of government, unfortunately. Governor Hochul tried to fix that in the last budget that just passed 2 days ago. And unfortunately, she was shot down in almost every one of her housing efforts. So she's going to go back to the drawing board, hopefully immediately, and start to fix those things. But what they did put out there, what she tried to put out there, was an incentive for conversions. And one of those incentives was, if you put 20% of your units as affordable housing, you'd get a 50% tax break over 15 years, phasing it over 4 more. So it was really a 19-year abatement. And we applied that to the building that we were working on, and it didn't work. It wasn't accretive to what we were doing. And so we went back through revenue to the governor and to the mayor, and we said, hey, you need more of this to be an incentive, because even if it's just break even, we're not going to do it. We need it to be more like 75% tax break for 25 years for it to be even break even. So we said, if this is a big political thing, don't fight for it because no one's going to use it. The response she got from the state senators in the state assembly was, we want to make any conversion obligated to put affordable housing. So they went from an incentive to an obligation, and obviously that didn't work, but that died too. So,
Yeah. And Jody, what do you think? I mean, it's frustrating that, you got suburban constituents, you got, people that are shooting down Hochul. They don't understand the importance of all this stuff to the city, in terms of incentivizing conversions, in terms of incentivizing buildings. Like, what needs to be done, or what can real estate do to push that? It's tricky.
You're fighting City Hall, so to speak, and
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for you, but I would like to say that one of our buildings on 3rd Avenue, we had net leased for 25 years, and we got that building back 2 or 3 years ago, and we knew we were getting the building back, and so we looked at demolition, we looked at residential conversion, and then there was a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance on the building because the previous tenant knew they were getting out, and we ended up putting a significant amount of money in the building, $150 million into the building, and we're showcasing the latest technology in MEP. We have dimmable or tintable windows, electronically tinted windows. So we brought that building up from its 1969 heritage to 2023 standards, and as a result, we are having significant leasing activity.
Yeah. And maybe this isn't as applicable now, but during the height of the pandemic, I think everybody was like, we might need to reinvent, not do office, not just do residential, but maybe we'll need to do urban farming in these buildings, or, self-storage or data centers. Have you looked at all those different alternative uses, or is that kind of just too far afield at this point?
I'd like to say, I don't think I can say we looked at everything, but just about everything.
Right. I was talking to somebody at Durst, and they said, oh, we've looked at urban farming, but when you grow stuff inside an office building, the light is different and the food doesn't taste as good. So that's that's a level of due diligence there that it sounds like you guys, explored a lot.
the best use I've seen has been pickleball.
Pickleball, yeah. Everybody's going to play pickleball eventually. You're going to be forced to. So I wanted to get back to, amenities and what you're seeing in these offices that can keep tenants there. But first starting with, at the Real Deal, so we're national in scope. We have a 10,000 square foot office. We've taken a lot of the desks out and converted it largely into an event space and a video studio. We have hot desks now. And that's just made more sense for us. What are you seeing from your tenants that they're doing themselves? Are interesting examples of innovative office uses right now that you're seeing?
Well, let's ask you a question. Are you using your space differently today, your 10,000 feet, than you were pre-pandemic?
Yeah, we're trying to me, it's not about the quantity of time in the office anymore. It's about the quality of time. So you got to bring people in and activate the space in a different way. And rather than just kind of working side by side with somebody in kind of your parallel laptop universe, you want to activate the space so it's actually, engaging. That's, engaging with other people, right? That's the more important thing, I think, in terms of thinking about space today. So that's kind of what our thought process has been with our own space.
So that's been our experience with many of our tenants. They're first coming back now full time, and they're figuring out how they're going to use their space. They're definitely using it differently. There's a Tuesday through Thursday model. Some of them, we have McKinsey in 3 World Trade Center. McKinsey's out of the office Monday through Thursday. They're on the road, they're traveling, they're consultants. They have to be in the office mandatory on Fridays. So it skews all our data. But just an interesting example. But they're not really using their space that much differently. Other tenants are trying to create more collaborative spaces. Obviously, law firms don't need the big libraries and all the filing stuff that they had. But that's changed. But that was changing pre-pandemic. I think the pandemic just accelerated all of that change.
Yeah.
So we haven't had any major tenants that we have, redo all their space. It's more about new tenants coming in and figuring out how they're going to use their space. And the issue is, unless their employees are all back, they're not going to figure it out yet.
Yeah.
So there's still a learning process for many tenants.
That seems like it's the case, yeah. Jody, how about you? What are you seeing from your tenants?
One of the things we're seeing from prospective tenants is that they're not quite sure as to what their future plans are. And so we have, up until COVID, typically we were making 10, 15, 20-year leases. Now, after COVID, as I said, tenants are unsure as to what they want to do 2 or 3 years from now. So we're shortening the terms of the leases, and we're offering 3 different levels of space. We're offering typical vacant space, we're offering furnished space, and we're offering something that we call Durst ready. I bet you guys don't have Durst ready space.
No, but we're willing to learn.
So Durst ready space is fully wired, all the technology is there. It's ready to go if the tenant wanted to move in 2 days from now.
Right.
So that gives them some flexibility in figuring out what they want to do.
And how about just building out amenity space? Marty, you touched on that. You spent $60 million in LA on that downtown LA office tower building out amenities. Like what really resonates with workers? I mean, is it having a pool in the office building? What's the stuff they can't do from home, and how does it, I don't totally get that, I think.
Not so much a pool, but look, the employers want their employees, our tenants want their employees to be able to come back, feel safe from a health perspective. So, you have to convince them that the systems in your building have all the up-to-date air qualities and everything else. You want them to feel like they want to be at work. So we make it easy for them. We have this app called Inspire. When you walk into 7 World Trade Center, it says, Stuart, welcome back to 7 World Trade Center. We were the first ones to integrate with Apple your iPhone as your card key, so you don't need a card key anymore. You swipe your your phone over the turnstile. It says, Stuart, go to elevator E8, and it'll take you to your floor. And then your app comes on without you having to do it, and it'll say, by the way, if you order from these 6 places before 10:30, it'll be at your desk by 12:30. And if you want to shop in a 1-block radius, these 4 stores have a 20% discount. And there's a yoga class on the 10th floor at 4 o'clock, and there's a concert in Silverstein Park at 6 o'clock. And you can dial that up or down. You can get more information or less information if you don't want to see it. And that's sort of part of the hospitality. We want the employees of our tenants to feel ingratiated in the building, safe, entertained, and wanting to come back, not wanting to leave and get out of there.
So it's almost like you have to make the sales pitch, the office is more exciting than the comfort of your home. Because it is nice working at home. I mean, you go down to the fridge, you grab lunch, you go back up, nobody's interrupting you.
You just want to make it a good experience. So one of the big things, tenants love outdoor space. So at 120 Broadway, which is a 115-year-old building, we just spent $70 million redoing that building over the last 3 years. And we created a bankers club with cafeteria style and restaurant style amenities. We have a rooftop deck for the tenant that all the tenants can access. We redid the lobby, digital turnstiles, and better access to the subway system. All that fun stuff to just make it a more pleasant experience for the employees of the tenant.
Right. It's kind of like you're replicating not a night out, but I mean something akin to that in a way, right? I mean, you're entertaining as well in some way. I wanted to ask too about office tenants and who the ideal tenants are these days. You obviously had Meta and Amazon, and 1 week they're all in the office, the other week it's permanent work from home. The next week it's come back in 2027. It's like all over the map. Is the ideal tenant these days like finance firms? Like they come to the office, they're deep-pocketed. Like who is the best tenant these days for you guys? Besides any tenant.
Anyone with a pen that's ready to sign a lease.
Yeah.
And good credit.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm sure Jody and I both experienced the same thing downtown. Downtown was, what was a 9 to 5 market pre 9/11, and it was a very much a banking market, so that you had a lot of trading firms, Wall Street firms, and at 5 o'clock, downtown shut down. Downtown today is a very different place. Most of the tenants, not most of it, a good mix of the tenants that both Jody and I are getting at the World Trade Center are from the TAMI industry, technology, advertising, media, and information systems. And they brought a lot of new life to the market. And a lot of people that work at those firms want to walk to work, so people are living downtown. So we went from 25,000 people living downtown pre-9/11 to about 75,000 today. So that whole market has changed, and now it's a 24/7 environment. It's not a 9 to 5 environment.
Right, right.
So we love our TAMI tenants, but there's still a lot of financial tenants. You still have American Express's headquarters down there, Citicorp's headquarters down there. We have some very large users who have always made downtown their home.
And I mean, Nathan, the first time you went around and did all these conversions in Lower Manhattan, that was before work from home and all this stuff. In the upcoming projects you're doing, how are you factoring in kind of the work from home component? Are you setting aside separate space for knowing that people are going to be working from home a lot? How does that figure into the layouts?
By the way, I was going to say in terms of tenants, the best kind of tenant is a paying tenant, whether they're in occupancy or not. But in terms of work from home, it's interesting that one of the bigger challenges of conversions physically are deep spaces, which we used to create windowless bedrooms called home offices. Well, it's interesting that post-COVID, these home offices have become actually very desirable. If they were a deficiency in the past, now it's actually an advantage.
Right.
And that's how we sort of solve that issue. But none of these physical issues of the buildings are detrimental now to conversions. The city has been under-delivering on market rate housing for a couple of decades. And with the population growth of our type of tenant, the younger professional coming to New York, with very limited supply, new supply, and a very thin pipeline of new product.
Yeah.
We can literally, our vacancy now is at around 1%, which is more of a statistical error than a vacancy. And we can, today, you can rent literally anything.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like there could be such an ideal scenario where you have this excess office space and you have, New York's short 500,000 apartments. I mean, the dream of that coming together to solve the affordable housing crisis and fill office buildings or get that to the right level of inventory is so tantalizing, right? So it's nice to hear you say that everything is convertible. But I wanted to ask about that. I mean, right, like home offices were considered a kind of throwaway before. Now they're actually valuable. And what else can you do with that kind of deep interior space? Because that's the real logistical problem of these conversions, right?
The challenge of most conversions, let's say in Midtown, fairly large floor plates in the base of the building. We essentially look primarily at sort of larger conversions. We don't look at buildings that are not cost effective, that are smaller, let's say, than 250,000 feet. With larger assets and deeper floor plates in the base, these buildings can accommodate very large amenity spaces,
right,
which are very desirable with tenants. And it takes care of all that deep space. It creates a nice amenity fee for the building. And what would have been a throwaway space all of a sudden creates a community within that building that can be utilized very, very effectively.
Right. And when you did this first round of conversions back in the 90s, I mean, that was before communal space was considered as attractive as it is now.
Right. At that time, we were not focused on delivering amenities of quality. We delivered amenities, but certainly nowhere near what the packages we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
In let's say in 55 Broad, we will have almost 30,000 feet of amenity space. So it's a
Wow.
fairly substantial amount for any building.
Yeah. So take us through that a little bit. 55 Broad, just how that pencils out. You bought it for sub $400 a square foot. Then what's your build-out cost there? Another $400 a square foot? And then how does that pencil out to the rent you hope to get?
It is a conversion today can be done probably for under $300 a foot in hard costs.
Got it.
Even though, let's say, construction costs have gone up in the past couple of years, labor costs are coming down a little bit, and you can still do a conversion for under $300 in hard cost.
Got it. So then you're at 700 a square foot, and I can't do the math on that, but what does that equate to at a per square foot rental number?
So I think we end up at a net about $1,100 a foot in that range.
Got it. Got it.
On a net basis.
Yeah.
And that's an efficient building.
Right.
Because the floor
right.
plate sizes are really good. The center core elevator, it just worked out.
And does that change on the project you're working on? I forgot the address of that one, but at 1,200 units, what happens when you do a scale that size? Is it do the economics change?
They do. There is economy of scale in doing larger projects. We're doing that project with GFP, and we were fortunate to have acquired the building in it was a distressed building that requires reskinning, adding 9 floors on top of it, coring 2 courtyards through the building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a lot of somersaults that we need to perform. Not the case at 55 Broad. That's a much simpler, more straightforward conversion.
Yeah. And are there regulatory and what sort of issues do you face when you're carving out 2? Because that seems like the crux of it, being able to core these buildings.
No regulatory issues. Incidentally, everything we do is we always look at projects only at the as of right conversions.
Right, right.
We don't, as I said, I don't like having to go to the city to ask for anything.
Yeah, that seems like a good policy.
So I've known Nathan 15 years now, but we didn't really get together until we bought a building from him in December of 21. We bought 116 John Street, which was a building Nathan actually converted back in 2012. 2012, right? Yeah. And when we took over the building, we really liked what he had done to it. We upgraded some of the things because it was already 10 years old. But we then called Nathan up and said, we love the building, we love what you did to it, we love running it. We just hate the fact that you made all the money on the conversion. So let's get together, and that's how we got together on 55 Broad. What's great about 55 Broad and other conversions that you do is when you do it right and you have the right floor plates and the right ceiling heights, these apartments are going to have 10.5-foot ceiling heights. You wouldn't build that new today. I know we would, and I don't think Jody would. As Nathan said, we have 35,000 square feet of amenities. We have a rooftop pool because we got rid of the water tower because we're no longer going to be using water through the building like that. The basement's going to have the basement is 14.5-foot ceiling heights. It's going to have fantastic fitness facility and co-working space and a lot of other amenities that we wouldn't put in if we didn't have that space, and you would never create that space in a ground-up development.
Right. So Jody, are you looking for your own Nathan right now? I mean, it's interesting. Nathan was saying all the guys he worked with back in the 90s started doing ground up and kind of left conversions behind, but you stayed kind of true to that project, which is coming, that type of project, which is coming full circle now. But are there other, Hines seems like it's got a big conversion, division, and there's some other players out there, but are you looking to get in the conversion game at all or considering it?
No, not. We've got our hands full, so I may be short-sighted, but at the moment we're not looking for.
But he probably sleeps better than we do at night.
Less competition for us.
Exactly right. So if you have dry powder today, what are the opportunities from an investment point of view for you guys?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Yeah, if you have dry powder today, or if you have money to deploy, what asset classes are you looking at? Where do you go? Like what makes sense to you these days?
So we have a couple of sites that we're asking ourselves that very thing. We have a great site at 125th Street and Park Avenue, and the two main areas that we're looking into is 100% affordable housing and life science.
Got it. And affordable housing, always a safe way to go, right? And life science, what would that look like? What's your kind of take on the whole ball of wax, the opportunities there, and that sort of thing?
As Marty said, it's a lot easier to say it than it is to design it properly.
Right.
There is very, very specific criteria that you have to meet. And also, from a practical standpoint, you have to design it the right way. So we have identified people in the field who are experienced, and so we're pursuing that with them.
So it really seems like it's a point at which the big developers really are partnering for expertise to branch out into these different areas, whether it be conversion or life sciences and so on. But that's interesting.
We have been involved in partnerships, and I think either one of these two gentlemen will tell you that they're very difficult.
Yeah.
And so only under the most stringent conditions would we seek partners.
Right. I mean, you guys have done so much yourself, it complicates things. And the last question I wanted to end with today is, we didn't even touch on the fact that, the existential piece of this for the city, if property taxes go down and services decline, that leads to more property taxes going down. I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about, I think, in the city today. Also, what the city and state is doing to help real estate. Is there anything that keeps you up at night these days that we haven't touched on?
Yes, the inequities of the taxing systems, real estate taxing system.
Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Just one of the most blatant issues is how residential buildings, high-rise residential buildings, get taxed. It's completely unfair when you compare the percentage that a brownstone gets taxed versus a high-rise residential building. And I think we're all interested in evening out the playing field, but it's a very difficult issue because the politicians don't want to be responsible for changing the present tax structure.
It's like everything else with the politicians, right?
Well, to give you more on that, what keeps me up at night is the fact that, New York City has, one of the best parts of New York City is it's got such a deep talent pool of people. That's why companies want to be here and people want to live here, because there's great amenities like our cultural facilities and our restaurants and all that. If we can't create housing, rental housing in this market, people won't be able to live here and go to the offices and enjoy what they want to enjoy as being New Yorkers. And we have a fantastic mayor now, in my mind, who's doing everything he can, but he's got one arm tied behind his back. We have a new governor who is also trying to do what she's trying to do to create affordable housing. I think the mayor wanted 500,000 units, and the governor wanted 800,000 units in the state. And she got shut down by our politicians, by our state assembly and our state senate. And that has to change. We lost our 421A affordable housing program last June. There's no replacement. She tried just to get an extender. They shot that down. So what everyone should be doing is, giving their opinion at the polls. So next November and the following November, or more importantly in June when the primaries are, we need to, tell the world what's going on with the politicians.
it's kind of like we need more affordable housing, but we don't want to build anything. So, you know, you can't get anywhere with that. Nathan, any closing thought?
Look, I agree completely with Jody and Marty, but I'd like to say the following. I guess, you know, New York has a certain, and will always have a certain base of sort of a group of people that need to be here, must be here, and they will pay any price to be here. And whether they are here for 3 years, 5, 10, or 2 years, they will pay the price.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the quality of life is slowly deteriorating, but I think that will reverse. And I think ultimately the market will take care of itself.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about all the disruptions that we've had with the pandemic and everything else, I mean, it's just natural we're going to go through some of this period.
Listen, without much help from the city or state,
Yeah.
as I said, I think the market will slowly bounce back and will be bigger and better than ever.
Right, free market, you know, adjusts to these realities, right?
Yep.
And shapes things. Well, I want to thank these guys for their great expertise today, great insight.